You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him discover it within himself. My name is Eric Pang. I've read over 1,000 books and connected 6,000 of my top learnings in my digital notebook. We're going to connect a bunch of these ideas together with Galileo's quote to see what we can learn about some of these questions that we've posed. So let's get started with the teachers and parents. When you've tried to teach somebody, but they're not really receptive to those teachings. So I have a couple follow-up questions like, how come we can't teach others anything? And why might someone resist outside teachings? So teachers open the door. Teachers open the door, you enter by yourself. That's a Chinese proverb. And this idea is that a teacher can only create the space for a student to go in and explore some ideas. Another related idea is we can't force others to act. This is from Phil Jackson in his book 11 Rings. One thing I've learned as a coach is that you can't force your will on people. If you want them to act differently, you need to inspire them to change themselves. Leadership is not about forcing your will on others. It's about mastering the art of letting go. And that kind of gels with my experience as a parent and as a coach. The more I've tried to force my kids or my clients to act a certain way, to learn something, oftentimes the more that they'll actually resist. And when I give them the opportunity to decide for themselves whether a topic is something that they want to learn, and I give them the opportunity to make a choice and to have autonomy, many times they are going to be much more receptive to what I have to say. So those two quotes kind of leave this question of, well, the teachers are there as a resource for the student, but the teachers can't force information or learnings down the student's throat. And next we have this question of, why might someone resist outside teachings? What about human nature causes us to resist somebody trying to teach us something? This is a quote by John Galt. A system that ignores feedback will eventually be shaken to pieces by repeated violent contact with the environment it is trying to ignore. And why might we try to ignore the environment? John F. Kennedy said that too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. Many times we like being right. We don't want to be wrong. And when somebody is trying to teach us something, there is often this implication that we are wrong about something, we don't have a full understanding of something. So it kind of pushes us one down as far as our status goes in relation to the teacher. And so there's this kind of status dynamic that kind of comes into play, and that, I believe, causes a lot of the resistance when someone is trying to force you to receive their feedback. So let's dive into the question related to the students. How much responsibility for the learning process falls on the student, you, versus the teacher? Related to that is two questions I have here. How much influence does a teacher have in a student's learning, and what role do we as students play in our own learning? We remember what is interesting. Arthur Schopenhauer said that as the body assimilates what is homogeneous to it, so will a man retain what interests him. In other words, what coincides with his system of thought or suits his ends. So many times a student or a child will only really receive or hear what is interesting to them, what is useful and can be applied by them. And many times, if a teacher or parent is trying to force something down the throat of a child or student, if it's kind of forceful, it oftentimes is suiting the ends of the teacher or the parent. And without thinking proactively as an educator or a parent as far as what the student or child cares about, it is kind of counterproductive to both the student and the teacher. Associative memory is this idea that in neuroscience that and cognitive science that for a memory to persist, this is by Eric Kandel. He was a Nobel Prize winning scientist on memory, his study in memory. The incoming information must be thoroughly and deeply processed. This is accomplished by attending to the information and associating it, connecting it meaningfully and systematically with knowledge already well established in memory. William James also said the more other facts a fact is associated with in the mind, the better possession of it our memory retains. So there's this idea that in order for us, the student, to learn something, it has to connect with other things that the student is already aware of and understands. And when we go back to kind of Galileo's quote of, you can only help him discover it within himself, there's this kind of connection that sometimes a teacher may try to teach something when the student doesn't have the proper connections to attach a learning to. And so for a student or a person to learn something, they must go within themselves and learn it for themselves, how it can be useful, how it can be applied, how it attaches to prior knowledge when we think about associative memory. Knowledge helps us act. Truth is a poor test for knowledge. The real test is utility. A theory that enables us to do new things constitutes knowledge. So this is kind of related to Schopenhauer's quote in the sense that a student will only really want to assimilate and learn something if it is useful to help them act in a certain way that aligns with their goals. If what the teacher is attempting to teach doesn't align with what the student is trying to accomplish with their life, that is useful in some positive way, then there's not much reason for the student to actually consume that information. So when we go back to this question of how much influence does a teacher have in a student's learning, if the teacher understands what the student is looking for at a deep level, what motivates them, what they're trying to do with their life, and can fit their teachings to match that, then a teacher can have a lot of influence. But if a teacher is really just trying to force, let's say, a lesson plan or trying to teach according to standardized testing without really thinking about what the students care about, then the teacher is likely to have very little influence over the students' learning. So the next question, what role do we play in our own learning? I previously talked about in a different video how absolute truths, I do not believe in absolute truths. I fear such beliefs because they block the search for better understanding. That when we believe we know something as a student, if we think we already have the answer, the correct answer, then if a teacher is telling us like, hey, that's not actually it, we're less likely to listen, especially if we are trying to protect our egos, if we're trying to look like we're smart, come off like we're smart, or we know what we're talking about. We're just going to shut down any ideas that the teacher's trying to teach us that doesn't gel or resonate with our kind of existing knowledge system. To be certain is to be ridiculous. Voltaire said, doubt is an uncomfortable condition, but certainty is a ridiculous one. And that's related to the previous quote of absolute truths block understanding, in the sense that if we believe that we are 100% certain and correct and right all the time, then there's no reason for us to learn anymore. Like, we are essentially believing that we are like God, that we are perfect, that there is no additional information that can come in that can improve our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. And so Voltaire is saying to be doubtful feels uncomfortable because you're accepting your own imperfection, that you don't know everything, and that's clearly uncomfortable. But when you're certain that you know everything, like he's just basically saying, like, that's ridiculous because there's no way you can know everything. Next is a quote by Charles Darwin from his autobiography. I have steadily endeavored to keep my mind free so as to give up any hypothesis, however much beloved, and I cannot resist forming one on every subject, as soon as facts are shown to be opposed to it. So this is a mindset of the scientific method where he's arguing that it's okay to form hypotheses and to have beliefs that are loosely held. That the moment somebody provides some piece of information that maybe goes counter to what you believe, that you are freeing up your mind to consider that piece of information and maybe sorting around what you think you know to come to some new hypotheses or conclusions about, your existing knowledge structure. So to answer this question of what role do we play in our own learning as students, there's this aspect of how we want to be certain, we want to be comfortable with our ideas and our beliefs, but the more that we hold really tightly to our beliefs and our ideas and the sense that we have truth perfectly figured out, the less receptive we will be to outside feedback from teachers. And the scientific method is really built on the idea to hold your hypotheses loosely, hold your identity, frankly, loosely. Keep your identity small is an idea that Paul Graham talked about, where if we acknowledge our own weakness as far as understanding, if we acknowledge that we can always improve, we can always learn, then our minds really open up and we become much more receptive to the teacher. But without that open-mindedness, the responsibility completely falls on the student. And that is what Galileo goes back to, is this idea that if a student is not open-minded, there's nothing a teacher can teach them. Whereas an open-minded student, if they are willing to go within themselves, to discover it within themselves, to let go of truths that maybe you held in the past and are willing to let go, then the teacher and the parent have much more ability to influence where the student goes. But it all starts with the student.